Imagine you're playing a game of musical chairs with your friends. The music stops, and suddenly everyone rushes to find a seat. But there aren't enough chairs for everyone. Some kids are left standing, looking around desperately for somewhere to sit. Now imagine if one of those kids who got a chair saw you standing there and scooted over, making room for you both to share. How would that make you feel? Sometimes certain countries find themselves standing without a chair when the music stops. They need help, but their neighbours, the ones who look just like them, speak similar languages, and share similar histories, refuse to scoot over and make room. Instead, they might even turn their backs entirely. But what if someone you didn't expect, someone from across the playground who doesn't quite look like you, doesn't speak exactly like you, but has a kind heart, offered you a spot on their chair? Would it matter that they weren't exactly like you? Or would you simply be grateful for their kindness and willingness to help when others wouldn't? This is the story of Morocco and 3 landlocked Sahel nations, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. King Mohammed VI of Morocco has extended a hand of friendship to the 3 landlocked countries, a gesture that ECOWAS countries failed to do. Instead, they threatened to invade Niger after Bazoum was ousted. Have you ever wondered what happens when powerful nations turn their backs on smaller ones? And could this story of Morocco's open hand change the way African nations work together forever? Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are 3 countries nestled in the heart of Africa. If you look at a map, you'd notice something important about these countries. They have no coastlines. They are completely surrounded by land on all sides. This creates a big problem. How do you get goods in and out of your country if you can't use ships and ocean routes? Normally, landlocked countries solve this problem by cooperating with their neighbours who do have access to the sea. They build roads and railways leading to ports in those neighbouring countries. They sign agreements that allow their trucks and trains to travel freely through these routes. And everyone benefits. The landlocked country gets access to international markets, and the coastal country earns money from the use of their ports and transportation networks. But what happens when this cooperation suddenly stops? In recent years, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso took bold steps to change their futures. For many decades, these countries had been heavily influenced by France, their former colonial ruler. France maintained military bases in these countries and had significant control over their economies. Many citizens of these nations felt that this arrangement wasn't fair, that they weren't truly independent, as long as France had such power over their affairs. So they made a difficult decision. Through various means, these countries decided to assert their independence from France. In Mali, citizens protested against the presence of French troops. The government listened and asked French forces to leave. Niger and Burkina Faso followed similar paths, with their governments taking stands against what they saw as continued colonial influence. These actions made France unhappy. But more surprisingly, they also upset many neighbouring African countries. The ECOWAS, an organisation that includes many countries in the region, didn't support these moves. Instead of standing with their African brothers and sisters, ECOWAS member states imposed harsh sanctions on these 3 countries. These sanctions closed borders, they cut off electricity, they prevented goods from moving in and out of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Even Nigeria cut power supply to Niger, causing patients in critical conditions in hospitals to suffer as power supplies became unreliable. Babies in incubators were put at risk, food became scarce, prices for basic necessities skyrocketed. It was as if these 3 nations had been playing the game of international relations, and suddenly all the chairs were pulled away from them. They were left standing alone, isolated, with their neighbours refusing to help. For countries without access to the sea, this situation was particularly devastating. They couldn't simply find another route to the ocean. Geography doesn't change. They couldn't easily trade with distant nations that might have been more sympathetic. The goods would still need to travel through the neighbouring countries that had closed their doors. So there they stood, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, surrounded by closed doors, wondering what would happen next. Their people suffered, their economies struggled, and the future looked uncertain. But as the old saying goes, when one door closes, another often opens. And sometimes, help comes from the most unexpected sources. While the traditional allies and neighbours of Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso had closed their doors, someone was watching from across the continent with compassion and strategic thinking. Yes, you guessed right. Morocco. King Mohammed VI of Morocco was paying attention. Morocco, located in the northwestern corner of Africa, shares the continent with these three nations, but is quite different in many ways. Many Moroccans speak Arabic, rather than the French and indigenous languages common in West Africa. The cultural traditions, while sharing some African elements, also reflect strong Arab and Berber influences. Even the landscape is different. Morocco has mountains and coastlines, while the Sahel nations have vast stretches of desert and savanna. Despite these differences, King Mohammed VI saw something simple: African brothers in need of help, and he decided to act. So he made an extraordinary proposal. He suggested launching an international initiative to enable the Sahel countries, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and others in the region, to have access to the Atlantic Ocean through Morocco. This wasn't just a vague gesture of goodwill, it was a concrete, practical solution to the immediate problem these nations faced. The king stressed that the success of such an initiative hinged on upgrading infrastructure in the Sahel countries and seeking to connect its transport and communication networks existing in the region. Imagine being locked in a room where all the doors have been bolted shut by the people you thought were your friends. Then someone you barely know comes along and not only opens a window, but offers to build you a new door and a pathway to freedom. That's essentially what Morocco was offering. The proposal wasn't just talk. In February, top diplomats from Morocco, Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali and Niger met in the southern Moroccan city of Marrakesh. There, they discussed the details of this ambitious plan: how to build the necessary roads and railways, how to modernise existing infrastructure, how to make the ports efficient enough to handle increased traffic, and how to ensure security along these new trade routes. The reaction from the Sahel nations was overwhelmingly positive. Their representatives expressed not just gratitude, but genuine excitement about this new possibility. It was as if someone had finally offered these nations a chair in the game they had been excluded from, a chance to sit at the table of international trade and cooperation again. But why would Morocco do this? What did they stand to gain? Some might say Morocco was simply being strategic, seeking to increase its influence in Africa and potentially gain economic benefits from these new trade routes. And there's probably some truth to that. Nations rarely act purely out of altruism. Yet the history of Morocco's engagement with other African nations suggests something more. It suggests a genuine commitment to what King Mohammed VI has called South-South cooperation, the idea that developing nations should help each other rather than always looking to wealthy Western powers for assistance. And as we'll see, this wasn't the first time Morocco had extended a helping hand to its African neighbours. To understand why Morocco's offer to the Sahel nations is so significant, we need to look at the kingdom's broader history of engagement with Africa. While many think of Morocco as primarily connected to the Arab world due to its language and some cultural aspects, the truth is that Morocco has deep African roots and has increasingly embraced its African identity in recent years. Under the leadership of King Mohammed VI, who came to the throne in 1999, Morocco has consistently worked to strengthen its ties with other African nations. This hasn't just been about political alliances or diplomatic niceties. It has involved concrete investments in infrastructure, healthcare, education, and economic development across the continent. One striking example is Morocco's involvement in Mali's healthcare system. On July 7, 2022, the King of Morocco inaugurated the Mohammed VI Prenatal Clinic in Bamako, Mali's capital city. This wasn't just any medical facility, it was specifically designed to address one of Mali's most pressing health challenges: high rates of maternal and infant mortality. The gynecology facility provides numerous critical services, including intensive care and resuscitation for mothers, neonatal resuscitation, and neonatology, all while adhering to the latest international standards. In a country where childbirth remains dangerous for many women and babies, this hospital represents a literal lifesaver. Think about what this means. Morocco didn't just send doctors or medicine, though it has done that too in various African countries. It invested in building a permanent, state-of-the-art facility that will serve Malians for generations to come. This is the difference between giving someone a fish and teaching them to fish, as the old saying goes. Morocco is helping to build capacity within Mali itself, and Mali isn't the only beneficiary of Morocco's African initiatives. The kingdom has made similar investments in agriculture, renewable energy, banking and telecommunications across the continent. Moroccan banks now operate in more than 20 African countries. Moroccan companies have built solar power plants in Rwanda and other nations. Moroccan agricultural experts have helped farmers in Ethiopia, Guinea, Madagascar, and elsewhere improve their crop yields. All of this reflects a philosophy that King Mohammed VI has repeatedly articulated. African problems require African solutions. Rather than waiting for former colonial powers or other wealthy nations to solve Africa's challenges, Morocco believes that African nations themselves have the capability and responsibility to help each other develop and prosper. This perspective becomes even more meaningful when we consider Morocco's own complex history with colonialism. Like many African nations, Morocco experienced colonial rule, in its case primarily from France and Spain. The country achieved independence in 1956, but the legacy of colonialism didn't disappear overnight. Morocco has maintained relationships with European nations, including France, but it has increasingly charted its own independent course in international affairs. And interestingly, when faced with crisis, Morocco has shown a striking willingness to rely on its own resources rather than seeking help from its former colonizers. This was powerfully demonstrated in September 2023, when Morocco experienced a devastating earthquake. The disaster killed thousands, destroyed numerous homes and buildings, and left many more people injured or homeless. It was exactly the kind of situation where countries typically request international assistance. Yet something remarkable happened. Despite the scale of the disaster, Morocco did not issue a general call for international help. It particularly did not ask France for assistance, despite the historical ties between the nations. This decision frustrated French President Emmanuel Macron, who publicly commented on the situation. "Morocco knows what we can offer," Macron said. "If Morocco needs help, Morocco needs to ask us for help. We have mobilized all technical security teams to be able to intervene when the Moroccan authorities deem it useful." The implication was clear. If you want our help, you need to ask for it. You need to acknowledge your need and our power to meet that need. But Morocco chose a different path. Instead of turning to foreign powers, the king mobilized domestic resources. He provided funding for those affected by the earthquake to rebuild their homes. He deployed Moroccan emergency services, medical personnel, and construction teams. And while Morocco did accept specific, targeted assistance from a few countries with particular expertise in earthquake response, it largely managed the crisis through its own efforts. This approach reflects a deep commitment to self-reliance and dignity. It suggests that Morocco understands something profound about international relations. Dependence on others, especially former colonial powers, often comes with strings attached. By developing its own capabilities and helping other African nations do the same, Morocco is working toward a future where African countries can stand on their own feet. And this brings us back to the current situation with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Morocco's offer to these nations isn't just about opening trade routes, though that's certainly important. It's about offering an alternative to dependence on former colonial powers or neighbours who might use their geographical advantages as leverage. It's about creating new possibilities for African nations to work together as equals. In this light, we can understand why the representatives of the Sahel nations responded so enthusiastically to Morocco's proposal. They weren't just getting access to ports, they were potentially gaining a partner who understands the importance of true independence and self-determination. What do you think is Morocco's vision for the Sahel? The meeting in Marrakesh between diplomats from Morocco, Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, and Niger wasn't just a routine diplomatic gathering. It represented something potentially transformative, a new model for how African nations might work together in the future. For too long, the dominant pattern in African international relations has been shaped by colonial legacies. Former colonial powers like France, Britain, and others have maintained significant influence over their former colonies' economic and political systems. Meanwhile, regional organisations like ECOWAS have sometimes seemed more focused on maintaining the status quo than on empowering their member states to chart truly independent courses. The recent actions of ECOWAS toward Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso illustrate this problem. When these countries took steps to assert greater sovereignty, particularly by reducing French influence, ECOWAS responded not with support, but with punitive measures. It shut down borders, imposed economic sanctions, and even threatened military intervention. These actions caused immense suffering for ordinary citizens in these countries. Morocco's initiative offers something different: cooperation based on mutual respect and shared interests, without the baggage of colonial history. This approach was explicitly acknowledged by the Sahel nations' representatives at the Marrakesh meeting. For Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, this creates a lifeline, a way to continue participating in international trade despite the sanctions imposed by their neighbours. It offers them breathing room to continue their journeys toward greater sovereignty without being strangled economically. But the potential impact of this initiative challenges some common assumptions about African unity. Some have questioned whether nations like Morocco, with its Arab cultural influences, are authentically African or fully committed to African causes. The kingdom's engagement with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso suggests that African solidarity can transcend cultural and linguistic differences. It suggests that what matters most is not whether you look exactly like your neighbour or speak the same language, but whether you're willing to extend a helping hand when it's needed. What lies ahead? There is something important many of us should learn from all this. Your brother is not necessarily somebody that looks exactly like you. Your brother is not the person you share skin tone with. When these three Sahel nations found themselves isolated by their neighbours, countries that share many cultural and historical similarities with them, it was Morocco, a nation often seen as culturally distinct from West Africa, that stepped forward with a concrete offer of assistance. This reality challenges simplistic notions about African unity and identity. The actions of ECOWAS toward Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso illustrate this painful truth. Countries that should, in theory, have been the most supportive of their neighbours' aspirations for greater sovereignty instead imposed punitive measures that caused real suffering for ordinary citizens. They closed their doors when their brothers needed them most. Morocco's response offers a different model, one based on practical solidarity rather than empty rhetoric about brotherhood. The kingdom didn't just offer sympathetic words, it proposed concrete actions to address the specific challenges these nations faced. It offered its ports, its expertise, and its commitment to developing the infrastructure needed to make this new partnership work. As Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Morocco continue to develop their new partnership, they are writing a new chapter in the story of African cooperation, one that might inspire others across the continent and beyond. They are demonstrating that when nations face closed doors, creativity, solidarity, and pragmatism can indeed open new pathways to prosperity and genuine independence. This isn't just a story about Morocco and the Sahel nations. It's about all of us, about rediscovering what true African brotherhood means, about challenging the colonial boundaries that still divide us, and about building new pathways when traditional doors are slammed in our faces. When Morocco extended its hand to Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, it wasn't just opening trade routes, it was opening our eyes to what's possible when African nations stand together without waiting for permission from former colonizers. If you felt pride, inspiration, or maybe even a spark of hope for a truly independent Africa, don't let that feeling fade away. Subscribe to the New Tourist channel right now, because this story of Morocco's initiative is just the beginning of many untold African success stories we're bringing to light. Stories that powerful interests would rather keep buried. Hit that like button to tell the algorithms that African solutions to African problems deserve to be seen and heard around the world. And if you want to go deeper, if you want exclusive updates on how this Morocco-Sahel partnership develops, early access to our investigations, and a community of people who refuse to accept Africa's colonial boundaries, join our membership today. Because what we're building here isn't just content, it's a movement to reimagine African cooperation. And this new chapter of African nations, extending hands to each other rather than waiting for external saviours. It's only the first page.